In 1861, the industrial might of the northern states was a sprawling, uncoordinated giant. Thousands of miles of iron rail crisscrossed the landscape, connecting cities, factories, and ports. But on paper, this network did not actually exist. Instead, it was a patchwork of hundreds of private competing railway companies. Each company set its own operational rules, printed its own timetables, and most crucially, used its own track gauge. A train leaving Baltimore on one company's tracks often could not continue onto the next line because the distance between the rails was a few inches wider or narrower. Passengers stepped off cars, hauled their own luggage across muddy town squares, and bought a new ticket on a different platform. For civilian commerce, this friction was an expensive nuisance. For a nation about to fight an industrial war, it was a systemic catastrophe waiting to happen. When mobilization began, the federal government attempted to move troops and supplies using existing commercial channels. The system immediately jammed. Freight cars piled up at break-of-gauge transfer points by the thousands. Warehouses overflowed with salt pork, hardtack, and ammunition while quartermasters watched helplessly as commercial managers prioritized private freight and high-paying civilian cargo over military requisitions. Worse still, once supplies finally reached the end of a commercial line, armies marching into hostile territory quickly outran their railheads. A single army corps consumed hundreds of tons of supplies every single day. Horses ate mountains of forage. Infantry required constant resupply of powder and lead. Once an army moved 20 miles beyond the end of the tracks, the horse-drawn wagon became the primary link. But wagons ate half their own cargo just feeding the draft animals, pulling them over unpaved roads. The front lines were slamming into a hard logistical wall. The solution required breaking a fundamental rule of 19th-century American capitalism. Private property was no longer inviolable. Under the Railway and Telegraph Act of 1862, Congress granted the President the power to take control of any railroad line, seize its equipment, and operate it for military necessity. The United States Military Railroads Organization was born. Civilian executives were replaced or subordinated to military engineers. Profits took a backseat to throughput. Rail lines were seized, standardized, and placed under centralized military direction. For the first time in history, an entire national transportation network was pressed into service as a single coordinated military weapon. Running a military railroad required a new kind of officer. The Army turned to civilian civil engineers, men accustomed to moving mountains and bridging chasms under impossible deadlines. Among them was Hermann Haupt, a brilliant construction engineer who took charge of military railroads in the Eastern Theater. Haupt understood that the enemy would not simply leave the tracks intact. Retreating forces burned bridges, twisted rails around trees, and blew up tunnels. Traditional Army engineers spent weeks surveying and rebuilding destroyed spans from scratch. Haupt changed the doctrine. He established construction brigades equipped with prefabricated timber truss sections, standardized tools, and militarized discipline. When a bridge fell, Haupt's men did not wait for blueprints. They assembled modular spans on site, often working around the clock while armed guards watched for enemy cavalry. Spans that once took months to build were restored in a matter of days, keeping the lifeline open to the front. Rebuilding the tracks was only half the battle. Once a line was open, keeping dozens of heavy trains moving across a single track without crashing into each other required absolute precision. Most Civil War supply lines operated on single tracks. There were no electronic signaling blocks or automated switches. Instead, the USMR deployed the electric telegraph alongside every mile of track. Dispatchers sat in central offices, tracking the position of every locomotive through a network of wired field stations. Train crews operated under strict, unyielding timetables. A conductor who missed a scheduled siding by 2 minutes risked a head-on collision with a heavily loaded ammunition train coming the other way. Discipline on the rails became as rigorous as discipline in the infantry. Schedules replaced luck, and the telegraph wire became the nervous system of the Army. The result of this industrial discipline was visible in the daily logistical miracle that sustained the Army of the Potomac. During major campaigns, single-track lines pushed forward 50, 60, or 70 miles behind the advancing front, carrying millions of pounds of supplies directly to forward depots. A single well-managed train could carry the load of hundreds of wagons, doing in hours what took days of grueling road travel. Soldiers received mail, fresh rations, and ammunition precisely when commands required them. The railroad made it possible to concentrate tens of thousands of armed men in a single location without starving them out before the battle even began. Yet a rail system is inherently brittle. Thousands of miles of exposed iron running through hostile or contested territory offered an irresistible target for Confederate cavalry raiders. Commanders like J.E.B. Stuart and Nathan Bedford Forrest made a specialty of cutting telegraph wires and tearing up tracks behind Union lines. If a bridge was destroyed or a stretch of rail was torn up, an entire army could be cut off from its flour, forage, and bullets within 48 hours. To counter this, the USMR developed an early version of rapid response maintenance engineering. Construction crews were stationed at strategic junctions with preloaded flat cars carrying ties, rails, and portable housing. When a break occurred, the repair train rolled out immediately behind the combat engineers, fixing the damage before the tactical situation at the front could collapse. By 1865, the United States military railroads had grown into the largest rail network in the world under a single management. The organization operated over 2,000 miles of track, maintained hundreds of locomotives, and moved millions of tons of freight and hundreds of thousands of troops. It was an administrative triumph that prefigured the industrial logistics of 20th century total war. Battles were still won by infantry and artillery, but those armies could no longer exist in the field without the daily mechanical heartbeat of the supply train. Most popular summaries of the Civil War focus on the dramatic clashes of generals, the smoke of artillery, and the valor of the charge. They leave out the ledger books, the telegraph keys, the standardized gauges, and the relentless pressure of the timetable. Yet the ultimate outcome of the conflict was decided long before the final surrender at Appomattox. It was decided in the railway yards, where the victory of the North was forged not just by men under arms, but by the iron discipline of a system that proved distance could be conquered by schedule.